I was very fortunate that I was brought up in a home where my parents believed in the Lord. I was baptized before I came into this country. What I mean is the personal baptism in water, 1962. Came into this country, left home on the 10th of October, arrived on the 11th of October, and tried to settle down. But settling down was very, very difficult in those days because only in the big conurbations did you find quite a few black people. And one of the things that the black people had to do between the 50s and the 60s was to buy their own houses. One chap in whose house I lived, he told me that he drove his truck from Birmingham to London each week, slept in his truck until he had the money to buy the house. And when you bought a house, you bought it cash. At least the black people bought their houses cash.
What was that?
Because I don't know if there were mortgages in that time, but certainly mortgages would not have been given to the black people. And so you went into the place, they looked at you, they looked you up and down, they might not want to sell you the house, whatever. But if you had the money, and he paid $5,000 for his house, and this house was in Tottenham, and then he rented it out to different people, something like the HMOs that you have now. One of the things that came out of this living was the black landlords will not allow white people into their houses, and the white people who lived near to them, very soon, as soon as they knew that a black family moved in, the white people put up their houses to sell, to move out, because they didn't want to live next to black people. So those were the kinds of images that you had.
We would call it white flight, I think is what in the US it was called.
Yes,
was it that same concept?
It is that same concept that there was no official segregation in the country. The government did not segregate the people. The government brought the people from the West Indies over so that they could work in the industries that had lost quite a lot of people during the war.
Okay, World War II, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, World War II. And
the government
to generate
itself, yes.
Because of people who had died?
Yeah.
Okay.
Government itself went out to the West Indies and recruited people. And the first set of people who came were the ones who had been here between 40 and 45 for the wars, the men. And so they came back. Those were the first ones. But they came back to a difference. When they were here first and they were fighting in the war, they were doing something and the people didn't make an exception to them because it was the war. But when they came back...
War has a unifying element, doesn't it?
And after that, the people just didn't want them around. Very few people wanted them around. And so these young men who came, returnees to a certain extent, found it very difficult to get places to live. Work was there. In London, it was London Transport. In the country, it was nurses and people in the hospitals. It would be the lowest of the jobs that they could get, but it was work. But when you wanted to find a place to live, that was the difference. People would spit on you. People would write things on their houses like no niggers, no Irish, no dogs. And they would actually look out of the door if somebody knocked on the door. And if they saw it was a black person, they would turn the sign around and say no vacancies.
Wow.
So that was life. The money that you were receiving was very small, extremely small. When I started in London Underground, for instance, I don't think I was getting as much as £6 a week. And out of that £6 a week, you paid tax and what we call national insurance now. And you still had to pay your rent, blah, 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 the other things. But before I started in London Transport, I worked at a place that was called Micah and Micahite, and it was in Barnsbury Square. If you can find Barnsbury Square on the map, this is North London, then you can see I was living in Highbury and walking to Barnsbury Square. It was a nice walk. It was a cold walk because this was October. Nevertheless, it was. When you're 19, you don't see those things. But the very first Sunday that I was in this country, I went to church.
So, what day did you arrive in this country?
I arrived on the Friday.
Okay.
My friend took me out on the Saturday to buy a coat, to
you
buy
need one
a
of those?
plate. Bought a plate, a cup, a saucer, a knife, a spoon, and a fork.
Mm-hmm.
So my
All the
own
necessities.
stuff, yes,
Yeah.
and a coat,
Okay.
because on the 12th of October it was cold to me.
What were you used to?
Well, if you're coming from a place where it's 28 degrees most times, so the weather was against me. However,
so it was probably, 15 or 10 or something?
To me it was minus.
Right.
How it felt on me. Anyhow,
Brilliant.
on the first Sunday, I wanted to go to church, which I expected to do. So I left the house where I was staying, walked up to the main road, turned left, and there was a church at the corner. I went into the church, sat at the back, because I didn't know anybody, and I can't say I enjoyed the service because I didn't understand much of it, because it wasn't the type of church that I was accustomed to. However, at the end of the service, the pastor came down the aisle and stood in the front, and he shook the hands of the people who'd been in the church. And when he came to me, or I came to him, he held out his hand, shook it, and said, "It was very kind of you to come, but there's no necessity because we can pray for you.
So,
No need to come again." Wow. But
it's just breathtaking, isn't it?
So that's why I understood that the people in the house where I was living, and these were Guyanese people, that's when I understood why they didn't go to church.
I see.
Because they probably tried themselves, and it was not made very friendly for them to go to church. And one of the things that I saw in London in the first years that I lived there, that they had very few people in church, and the people who were in the church were white people, and the people who were in the church were old people. And it might be just that generation that, because the pastors had to be careful with their congregationalists, whatever word they use. I cannot tell you whether it was an English church or an Irish church or whatever, but it just was a place. That might be the reason why the older people didn't want to sit in pews with people who are a different color or whatever. I don't know. That's all I can say. I don't know. But it took me about 3 months to get to church, because I sent a letter to my own pastor at home, and my pastor sent back a letter to tell me and gave me an invitation where I could go to church. I went to church at Chumley Hall, and that is up in Archway. Okay?
Okay.